So let me go back over what has happened in recent history. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the British-controlled territory into a Jewish state and a Palestinian Arab state. The Palestinian and other Arab leaders did not accept that compromise and launched a war to destroy Israel, which they failed in doing. The result of the ceasefire that followed that was that the West Bank was under Jordanian control and Gaza was under Egyptian control. That situation continued for almost another 20 years, in which there was again no willingness on the part of the Arab leaders to compromise for peace, pursue peace. Then in 1967, the Arab armies massed on Israel's borders, but Israel struck first, and as a result of its victory, gained control over Gaza, the West Bank, and also the Sinai Peninsula in the south, and the Golan Heights in the north. Following that conflict, there was again no willingness to negotiate until 1979, when Egypt signed a peace agreement with Israel in exchange for the return of the Sinai Peninsula. The next important milestone was in 1993 to 1995, what's called the Oslo Peace Process. During that time, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, agreed to negotiate with Israel. As part of that process, Israel agreed to the creation of a Palestinian Authority controlled by the PLO, which controlled, during that time, was given control over almost all of Gaza and the major population centers of the West Bank. Those negotiations culminated in 2000 when the Israeli leaders offered a Palestinian state on all of Gaza, over 95% of the West Bank, and a capital in East Jerusalem. The PLO did not accept that and instead intensified its attacks on civilian targets. Israel's response to that over the next few years is what's called disengagement. So the Israeli government decided that because it did not have a partner to sign a final peace agreement, it would separate itself from the Palestinian population until that was possible. So in 2005, Israel withdrew completely from Gaza and created a separation fence separating Israel from almost all of the West Bank. In 2007, Hamas seized control over Gaza from the Palestinian Authority. Since that time, Hamas has launched 5 major attacks on Israel beginning in 2008, the most recent one just recently. In the 4 previous attacks, Israel did not try to remove Hamas from power or to reimpose its control over Gaza because it considered the price to be too high. That only changed as a result of this most recent attack. So to summarize, the reason why there is no Palestinian state is because Palestinian leaders for decades have refused to accept a state unless it also includes the destruction of Israel and its Jewish population. Thank you.
Can we limit the demonstrations? You can do that, you just can't do it here. So I suspect there are alternative perspectives on that history. If anyone would like to offer a different reading.
Just a little clip.
Oh, you can have it.
Can somebody hand him a mic?
Yeah, it's working.
It's on.
It worked like that, okay.
Yes.
It seems like it goes in and out.
No, it's going in and out.
Can you hear it? Okay.
No,
Going in and
no.
out. Let me turn this one off. First, I'd like to, before I respond to what Shale said, I'd like to really thank the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, its chancellor, for giving us all this opportunity. It's really great when a university does what a university is supposed to do, which is to debate important topics rather than trying to censor individuals or only present one narrative. So I want to thank UWM, my alma mater, graduated from here. I'd also like to thank Dr. Chiavane as well for also working with us here as well. And I'd like to thank our moderator and other panelists. I clearly don't agree with the narrative that Shale presented. And I do ask, like Doug did, I think that rather than responding, let the people here respond. You guys ask questions. Let's give us the most time to respond. Don't agree with the narrative at all. There was no Israel in 1947. There was a Palestine. There is. If we could just hold off, please, on that.
British mandate. It was in Palestine. British mandate. Not
Okay. Thank you for being a historian here. So there was no country called Israel at all. I guess that wasn't in the British mandate. The British mandate was given after the Ottomans had been defeated in World War I, and it was a way to guide supposedly these uncivilized countries to ultimate independence. Everyone knows that the British gave dual promises to the Zionist community that came from Europe. They wanted to promise them a Jewish state in Palestine, although the British didn't have a right to give the country of the Palestinians to a group of people from outside. But anyways, we know the story, we know the history. We know that Britain took the problem to the United Nations, and that on November 29, 1947, that the United Nations, which was largely controlled by the major colonial powers, most countries were not independent, decided to partition Palestine. This was a General Assembly, decided to partition Palestine, giving the disproportionate share to what was supposed to be the Jewish state, 56%, although the Jewish community was less than a third even after decades of immigration against the will of the Palestinian people in most cases. When ultimately Israel, which was well armed, because there was actually, the British were arming the Jewish paramilitary groups, the Haganah, the Stern Gang, the Palmach. We know that they have the power. You know what? I'll tell you. Hold on. It's okay. I would advise you, for those who seem to have limited knowledge, I would advise you to read the historians who are Jewish, okay, such as Ilan Pape, who wrote The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and many other Jews who are very familiar using Israeli archival sources will tell you exactly what happened. Okay, I'm not here to give you propaganda. This is a university. Let's try to talk some facts. Okay, what happened was when Israel finally they won the war, they defeated the countries, the Arab countries that actually came in to protect that part of the state that was supposed to be the Arab state. By the end of the war, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. The West Bank and Gaza was 22%. Okay. I don't need to go through all of the other wars. Shale says that, these were defensive wars. Disagree. These are wars of occupation. They occupied more land. They put more people under occupation. We know that. I want to get to a little bit more of the recent history, which is Oslo. There's this constant refrain that we hear from this Zionist community and the pro-Israelis that the Palestinians were given this great proposal to create a Palestinian state, and the Palestinians rejected it, and the Israelis were so generous they wanted to give them that. That's not how the Palestinians viewed it. Palestinians, when the PLO made a historic compromise and recognized Israel's right to exist, they said, we want to have a Palestinian state in 22% of original Palestine. That is what Israel had occupied in 1967. They said, we want the West Bank, we want Gaza, and we want East Jerusalem to be the capital. Well, that was not to be. As we know, the Israelis had already put tons of Jewish settlements around Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and for a while there were actually settlements in Gaza as well, which, yes, they did leave in 2005 and then put Gaza under siege. The Palestinians, though, were not willing to accept, after compromising 78% of their historic homeland, were not willing to have the Israelis who said, oh, we just need the Jordan Valley for security, we need the settlements to stay there, these major settlement blocks, we want to keep the area around Jerusalem. You want to nickel and dime them to death, whittle down what is the Palestinian state into what really would become little Bantustans, which is actually what is going on right now. These are little, like the homelands of South Africa, where the blacks were confined, the little areas surrounded by white rule. And this is how the Palestinians live right now. This is why in the West Bank right now, you see that the Palestinians are being attacked right and left, being killed right and left. There's been more Palestinians in the West Bank, where Hamas doesn't rule, more Palestinians killed this year than in any other year. The problem is when you have a racist, religious, supremacist state that doesn't recognize the humanity of all people, where we cannot apply international laws and conventions in this land to resolve this dispute, that's where the problem is. If we were to follow international law and conventions, and we don't allow apartheid, which all human rights organizations in the world, including the Israeli B'Tselem, has called Israel an apartheid state, if we cannot get rid of a system of apartheid and racism and occupation and annexation, then I don't think we can accept that there's going to be peace.
I'd also like to respond to this question by moving a little bit into more recent history and specifically addressing the attacks of October 7th, which I think we can describe as one in a long line of terrible incidents of violence carried out by both Israelis and Palestinians. Although I think it's important to note that Palestinians' deaths have far outnumbered those of Israelis in the tragic history of this conflict. The Hamas attacks of October were partially a result of an increasingly hardline Israeli settlement policy, radicalization of both the Israeli settler movement and Islamist groups, the weakening of the Palestinian Authority. The cause of these attacks is also a failure of the international community to arbitrate a just solution that would allow both Jews and Palestinians to live with safety and dignity and have moderate governmental bodies. It's important to understand the historical roots of this conflict, and I think I would agree with Othman Atta's characterization. But we also have to understand that the roots of this conflict lie in European anti-Semitism. The Jews in Europe suffered long periods of persecution and then, of course, near total annihilation in the Holocaust. The solution for Zionist Jews was the creation of a homeland in Palestine, but unfortunately that homeland was also already occupied by Palestinians. So the problem is, of course, that we have to understand that Palestinians did not want to stand by and see their land being taken away, right? It's not unreasonable for people to remain faithful to their homeland and want to defend it. However, Palestinians have been displaced and expelled from their ancestral homeland in multiple waves since the late 19th century. This has been overseen by European powers. In the 20th century, the expulsion was allowed by France and Britain to create a national home for the Jews. The Jews deserve safety, but not necessarily at the expense of the safety of other people, which is essentially what has happened. Since 1948, Israel has increased its territories by violent expulsion of Palestinians, seizure of land, destruction of homes. The international community has not done enough to halt this violence. Neither Israeli violence against civilians nor Palestinian violence against civilians is justified. And it'll take a new approach by the international community to halt this cycle. More recently, there's been growing violence for months between Israeli soldiers and settlers and Palestinians in the West Bank. Armed Israeli settlers have attacked Palestinian villages. The Israeli Defense Force has raided Palestinian cities, murdered civilians. Palestinians have responded violently. The longer backdrop is the 16-year-old blockade of Gaza by Israel and Egypt that has left Gaza in desperate circumstances. In Gaza, Palestinians have been trying to survive in the face of harsh territorial restriction, lack of food, water, medical supplies. 81% of the population lives in poverty. Access to clean water and energy is at crisis levels. When men, women, and children demonstrate peacefully at the Gaza barricade, they are shot with illegal explosive bullets and dangerous gas. A group like Hamas, tragically, grows out of a deterritorialized people who have little hope for the future.
So, the original question, I think, was what are the historical roots of the current violence? And Doug, you mentioned at the beginning that despite it being a conflict between two ancient peoples, that it's distinctly modern. And I think one of the challenges is that it is both modern and it is ancient. Where you begin a story says something about how you view the story. And so the characterization that Israel is occupying this land is, I think to many Jews, myself included, it's a pretty offensive statement to make. There's been a continuous Jewish community in this area of the world since antiquity. It is indeed true that in modern times there were waves of immigration of Jews from Europe. There also, by the way, following the war in 1948, was massive immigration of Jews from other parts of the Middle East when one by one countries throughout the Middle East were expelling their Jewish populations. Those Jews had nowhere else to go. Europe was just emptied of its Jews following the Holocaust, and the new Jewish state was the only place to take them. I am more concerned, however, by the form the dialogue has already taken, not just the outbursts from the crowd, which are, I think, wholly unhelpful. But the question was about history. And immediately, sort of accusatory statements are thrown out, and I think that they're quite unhelpful. Narrative and history; these are difficult things to take apart from each other, and we can disagree on sort of what narrative is the most convincing, and so on and so forth. But there are facts, and they should be respected. And some of those facts are uncomfortable to people who are sympathetic to Israel, and some of those facts are uncomfortable to those who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I hope, however, that most of us can find sympathy for each side. So that being said, sympathy always gets a clap, I guess. That being said, I do think, I started to write down sort of things that I believe were factually incorrect, and I literally just sort of ran out of the effort to do so. I think that what Shale mentioned at the beginning was a narrative in which what brought us to this is the refusal of the Palestinian leadership to compromise. Again, this could be debated or not, but at the end of the day, these offers were made. You can read about them all over the place. This is no secret. They were well reported on at the time. And the question, was the offer perfect? No. By the way, it wasn't perfect to either side, right? We act as if sometimes, the Israelis have no interest in the land in Gaza or in the West Bank. But keep in mind that to religious Jews, almost all of the stories in the biblical text, a huge percentage of them happened in the West Bank. One of the holiest sites in Judaism is in the city of Hebron, and so for many Jews, giving this up was indeed a painful compromise. I think the understanding is that a compromise means that both sides are not equally happy. Actually, both sides are equally unhappy. That you're absolutely right that a compromise is unfair to the Palestinians. There's no doubt about it. It's also unfair to Jews. And the purpose of a compromise is to figure out how we can find an arrangement that is equally unfair to each side. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to do that. I don't think I have to tell any of you that we don't live in a perfect world. And so the fact that not only were the offer made as part of the Oslo Accords, then later at Camp David rejected, they were rejected without even a counteroffer. Right? If this was a matter of, okay, but we need to have land swaps here and there, okay, you're going to include these settlement blocks in the Jewish state, so let's find good quality land that can be taken away from what's supposed to be the Jewish state and given to the Palestinian state so that there's an equal amount of geography, an equal amount of arable land, whatever it might be. Those are absolutely legitimate critiques and conversations that we can have. But to say absolutely no and to not compromise, I think reinforces and just continues a struggle. And the language here that we use matters. And to use terms like colonialism, in my opinion, is to misrepresent the struggle that is happening. I firmly believe that the struggle is the struggle between two peoples that each are indigenous to the same piece of land. Two completely legitimate and understandable national dreams, where both Jews and Palestinians deserve to live in their ancestral homeland in peace and in dignity.
Well, needless to say, the historical narrative is hardly a settled matter, and it's our intention, if appropriate, and there's interest in having subsequent sessions that will deal more directly with the history. But right now I'd like to change the focus to not contemporary Israel or Palestine, but contemporary Milwaukee. So I wonder if Josh and Othman, you could spend a few minutes telling us why the events so far away have such resonance for people living here.
Okay, I guess I have to turn it on. Obviously for the Palestinians and for their supporters, the biggest issue here is they see a human rights catastrophe right now. Put aside all the issue about the land and who should be there. And again, I disagree with some of Josh saying this wasn't a conflict from 2,000 years ago. That's not what they were fighting about. But the problem right now is everyone knows that for 75 years, the Palestinians have had their land taken away, and the right of return, which is guaranteed under international law to all people who either flee conflict or are driven from their homes, has not been applied to the Palestinians. And we know that, and the Israelis will admit to that. Why do you have Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and Gaza? Gaza, 78 to 80% of the people there are not indigenous to Gaza, they're refugees. If we're talking about two people, and there are two indigenous people, and this is a national narrative of two people, then why shouldn't they be equal on the same land? If that is the way that you want to define it. I think that what has actually really changed how people think. First of all, we have a lot of people who have family in Gaza. We have people here in the audience that I know their family members have been wiped out in Gaza. These are not Hamas, these are civilians where you have mothers and fathers. One of the individuals, his sister, who had been taking care of their mother, was obliterated in a missile attack in a marketplace. They see these horrifying images of entire buildings being brought down on top of people, and they don't have, of course, water. I mean, imagine it, imagine. In the history of humanity, you not are only bombing the hell out of a people using the most advanced weaponry that exists, but you started it off by cutting off their water and their food and their electricity and any of the fuel that they needed for their hospitals and their ambulances and for their equipment, even to move the rubble. So you see these heart-wrenching images of people using their hands to try to pull their family or relatives or neighbors out of the rubble because they don't have equipment to do that. And at the same time, they don't even have the food or electricity or anything of that sort. When you look around the world, I think the people have seen the Palestinians who have suffered for so long without their freedom, without having their basic human rights. Okay? This has been a huge problem. And people know that they have not had their rights, they have not had their freedom, they have not had their independent home, and they know that the Israelis, who are well-funded, well-armed, and have just been brutalizing the Palestinians for decades, and continue to do so on a daily basis, this is part of what the people see. And that's why you have hundreds of thousands and millions of people demonstrating around the world. Because they do see an inhumanity in what is going on. I mean, 5,000 to 7,000 children, babies, being killed. I mean, you could tell me all you want about Hamas's hiding. You could tell me all that you want. When those bombs are killing those. You know, if there was 1, 10, 100, 200, 500 innocent civilians killed, you'd say, you know, Israel is trying to minimize civilian casualties. This is a real army. They're going in there and they're going to take out their enemies, who they say is Hamas. But that's not what's going on. Half of the buildings in Gaza were brought down. The Ministry of Health, which I don't believe their numbers either, I think it's much, much more than what they're saying, because they don't have access to most of the areas or the buildings that have been destroyed where people are living under them. I believe that the number of deaths are in the tens of thousands of innocent civilians. And we see the picture. You could say it's not happening. You know, maybe my video screen is lying to me when I'm looking at these images from Gaza every day, from different refugee camps, different homes, different apartments. This has actually empowered people to act. People who have a conscience. People who believe in human rights. People who believe that there must be a better way and that military and war is not the way to solve problems. How could this have been avoided? Well, yeah, if there was a Palestinian state, Palestinians were treated as human beings equal to the extremist, Zionist Jews who are subjugating them. If they were treated equal and they had their own state, there would be no reason to want to fight. There would be no reason to want to attack others. This is the problem that we see. Now,
Okay, Othman, I think in the interest of time, we need to...
okay, let me wrap it up.
Okay.
I think that what we all see as well is the power of the pro-Zionist community in this country when it comes to trying to intimidate and coerce people from speaking out. When you have these CEO billionaires talking about going to universities and telling them we're not going to get you jobs, or we're going to get you fired from your jobs, we want to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on pro-Israeli propaganda. They're intimidating people. They're trying to prevent them from exercising their right to express their support of the innocent Palestinians. That's another issue we could maybe address.
Again, we've got very limited time, and this is very quickly using it up, so we could limit the responses. Josh, so the original question was, what is the resonance, what is the impact on people in our community, and what's the connection?
Yeah, I want to speak to exactly that question, because that was the original question, and I think it actually relates to what we just saw, which is the fact that I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I want you to understand that we just heard applause to classic anti-Semitic hate speech. Because listen, when I say that there are ancient roots, and this is part of the reason why, can we please be quiet? Part of the reason why I mentioned earlier that there are ancient roots to this is because anti-Semitism is one of the most ancient forms of hatred. And one of the classical tropes of anti-Semitism, which you can see back to the Middle Ages, is the notion that Jews control the money, Jews control the media, Jews control the world based on our control of capital. And there are people in this room, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the year 2023, applauding the same kind of hateful rhetoric that has led to the murder and torture and genocide of Jews for generations.
Did he say Jews or Israelis?
It's not, folks, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. How did this affect us in Milwaukee as a Jewish community? The Jewish community is a traumatized community.
So are the Muslims.
So are the Palestinians. I'm not denying that. I didn't say at any point that the Palestinians are a traumatized community. The Jewish community is a traumatized community because we have all grown up, the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, many of us grew up knowing what it was like to not have a Jewish state, not knowing what true safety and security in any country was, because until the United States of America, Jews never had safety and security in any country. And by the way, in the United States of America, we're not so safe either, given the fact that I don't think the Jews of Germany would have felt that they were unsafe in the 1920s. And Israel became the hope for many Jews that finally there was a piece of land in which Jews would no longer be victims. That there was a security establishment there to protect Jewish lives. And October 7th was a failure of Israeli military intelligence. It was a failure of defense, but mostly what it did was a failure to protect this sense of security that many of us had. I think there were many in my parents' or grandparents' generation that also already struggled with that because they remember the Yom Kippur War in 1973, in which Israel was almost overrun. But in my generation, we grew up with Israel having a very secure military. By the way, those who are now yelling and shouting and raising their hands at me are going to say the military is too powerful, they're doing terrible things. One of the challenges of having a powerful military is that you have to find the balance between protecting your population and not being overly aggressive. And there are certainly times in which that has been violated. And thank goodness the state of Israel has an active court system which can prosecute those violations. Not that it always works perfectly. But on October 7th, what we saw is something that I thought, and I think many of the Jews of my generation, even for that matter my parents' generation, thought was something that was confined to the history books. It was, and there's no other word for it, a pogrom. When you talk about the violence that's happening, it was not just violence. We are talking about acts, and I hate going over it because it almost seems crude to the memory of those who died. But there are reports of entire families being burned alive. There are reports of decapitations. There are reports of women who were raped so violently that they were not able to straighten their skeletons in order to fit them into a casket. This was an unbelievable level of not only violence, but cruelty. And by the way, it wasn't just Jews. There were many Arab Muslims that were murdered on October 7th. There were Thai farm workers that were murdered on October 7th. This was truly a catastrophe. And the biggest challenge, I think, for us was not only was it a reminder of this sort of violence against Jews is not confined to history, but it also meant that we knew what was coming next, is that the second Israel attempted to defend its citizens, the second something struck back, that we would face this kind of outcry. But it's actually worse than that. Because on October 7th, I immediately started flipping through social media and found groups, including student groups at this university, who I'm sure some of them are representing here today, celebrating the Hamas terrorists that committed these atrocities before a single Israeli bomb had fallen on Gaza. And so these are two peoples that both have a right to dignity and security. They're also two people that are deeply, deeply traumatized. And until we can stop shouting at each other, until we can listen, it's going to be hard to have this kind of conversation. And so I want to go on a limb here, and I want to say that one of the things that I've committed to doing is understanding that I can only make you understand the trauma and the pain that I feel if I can seek to understand the trauma and the pain that others feel as well. And so, Othman, you mentioned that there are people in the room, and I saw a few hands go up that have lost loved ones in Gaza. I have lost people that I know on October 7th in the attack. And I want to say truly and honestly from the bottom of my heart, I'm very sorry for your loss. And I hope that we can find a way to feel that love and sympathy for each other instead of simply shouting at each other.
You can have your chance, but I need to answer this for 1 second. Briefly, I'm sorry. No, I will let you. Sheila, you know what? I'm willing to see her till midnight. I'll let you. I'll let you see. Unfortunately, guys, please let's not interrupt. Again, I'm trying to understand Josh's point of view as well. Okay. The problem is, I understand that they want us to share in the grief and the victimhood that they've had, but the question that the Palestinians have, there is not one Jewish institution, including the Hillels and the Jewish Federations in Milwaukee, that have ever said one thing in support of the human rights abuses taking place against Palestinians. How can you expect us to come out? I mean, if you've been silent all these years, and I'm sorry, you haven't been silent. The institutions, they have supported Israel, financed Israel, funded Israel, and they've tried to constantly close down the Palestinian narrative. How can you say that you can feel sympathy when it's now just convenient to say so, but for 75 years it hasn't been there?
I have personally condemned Israeli human rights abuses when I've seen them. I've done it from a synagogue of 4,000 members and got screamed at by right-wing members of that community for doing it. I think that is wholly untrue and unfair. I've done it myself, and many Jewish institutions have done it. And the question is, where is the partnership in it? Where was the condemnation of October 7th? That's the question. Sheila?
Yeah, in response to this question, I would say that I'd like to point out that I am neither a member of the local Jewish population nor the Muslim community here in Milwaukee, both of which are sizable. I have many longtime friends, students, colleagues in both communities. Also, along with two colleagues here at UWM, I've done long-term research within the Muslim community here, the Muslim Milwaukee community. I would say that my Jewish friends and colleagues that I've spoken to here in the city have been affected in two ways. First of all, they experience terrible fear for their friends and their family in Israel. after the devastating October 7th attacks. At the same time, after Israel engaged in the massive bombing campaign in Gaza, Jewish friends I spoke to often expressed horror at the death of Palestinian children, women, and men, and the destruction of their homes, schools, and hospitals. They expressed understanding also for Israeli citizens who were worried about the hostages who were taken into Gaza, and of Israeli concerns for their safety. Some of my conversations with Jewish friends and colleagues here have also involved an expression of distress that some Israelis have so little concern for Palestinians in Gaza. Local Palestinians I've spoken to and read about have been devastated by the loss of multiple family members, friends, and colleagues. Some have many members of extended families, including small children who have been murdered. They are emotionally distraught, angry that the international community is allowing this violence to continue day after day.
Okay, so I would just like to start by reminding everyone what is the primary slogan we're seeing from pro-Palestinian demonstrations. It's from the river to the sea, Palestine
will be free!
What does that mean? That means that Israel should be destroyed. Israel should be destroyed is what it means. And its Jewish population should be massacred. That's what it means. And Othman and the rest of you are denying the right of the Jews to a homeland there, even though Jews were the primary people in that land for 2,000 years before the rise of Islam. No Judaism, no Islam. It would not exist. So it makes no sense to deny Jews the right to exist in the land. Furthermore, we all know here from experience that when it's okay to kill Jews in one place, it's okay to kill Jews everywhere. And that's why Palestinian extremists have killed Jews outside of Israel for decades. That's part of their strategy, and that's part of the stress that Jews feel. If we cannot condemn extremism in this form, we will not be able to condemn it in any form. These extremists, Islamic extremists, far-left extremists, neo-Nazis, they will continue with their reign of terror around the world, as Islamic extremists are doing now across Asia and Africa, and as the Nazi regime and various communist regimes have done in the past in our century. So, another final thing I'd like to point out is that the primary victim of extremists very often are the people that they claim to represent. And that's also true in this case. The primary victim in this conflict, and often in the past, Palestinian and other Arab extremists have been Palestinians as well as Jews.
Well, can we bring our focus back to our community? Obviously, again, taking a temperature check, this is a very hot issue. And I opened with the premise that dialogue and constructive engagement may or may not be possible. So I think if you're an observer in this room, you might be a little skeptical. But I would ask anyone who wants to jump in, what would you like to see going forward around this issue to make it possible for some level of understanding between the two communities?
So, I gotta say, I think I'm actually, I think I'm the most pessimistic I've been right now. And the reason is now twice I've seen applause for statements that in real time we are trying to, that both Shale and I have told you are deeply, deeply hurtful and dehumanizing and offensive to Jewish people. And they're shouted out. I think that we have to pay attention to the words that we use. There are words that can build bridges, there are ways that we can speak, and there are ways that we can destroy. There is a tremendous amount of anger in this room. And I don't think constructive dialogues tend to come out of anger. Anger has a place. I felt plenty angry over the last number of weeks, trust me. And I think that sometimes many of us have felt angry and not had a productive place to place our anger. But when you cheer on anti-Semitic language, this is a red line that we really can't cross. When I said that I think both sides need to find some sympathy and empathy, part of that means truly listening to the others. In a statement like the rhyming statement that everyone was shouting out just a minute ago, there's been a debate about what it actually means. It's pretty clear, given the historical context, that it is indeed a statement which, at best, is a dog whistle for a genocidal call to murder Jews. But even if you don't believe that's true, you have here someone who's telling you it's hurtful. And yelling it from campus here in Milwaukee is not going to save any lives. It's not going to change any policies. What it will do is hurt people and make them afraid. Hillel International, our umbrella organization, has been doing research into the attitudes of college students. And I forget the exact number, maybe it was 84% of college students reported that they feel less safe on campuses today than they did before October 7th. More than half feel truly... So, both sides feel unsafe. That's what I'm hearing. And the question is, what can we do to make each other feel safer? Not only feel safer, but be safer and have a dialogue which is constructive. And I almost didn't want to speak at the end here because it doesn't seem like anyone's going to listen, but I'm hoping that there are a few people who truly are listening. Which is to say that if there's something that I say that makes you feel unsafe, come to me afterwards and tell me. I'd love to hear about it, find out what I should say differently. I'm not going to change my opinion, but if there's a word I use that I should use another word, fine. What we're saying, great example. You're calling something a genocide against a people that just experienced one of the closest successful genocides in history. It's not helpful.
Oppressed became oppressive.
You're honestly proving my point, which leads me to believe that I should stop talking. Which is to say this. I hear all the people yelling, I hear all the people screaming. I also see people who aren't. I think that one of the painful things and one of the ways we'd like to move forward is to say that there is tragedy on both sides, and I think that both sides feel that the other is not understanding their tragedy enough. And maybe there is some truth to that, sure. However, denying all of the trauma of one side, dehumanizing the other side is not the answer to solve that. Digging deeper, digging your heels deeper into what you already believe is not going to solve that either. What will solve that is actually truly stopping the shouting and listening to one another. And hopefully then we can actually have some kind of constructive dialogue.
So I want to respond in several quick ways here. First of all, as part of my faith from our scripture, it says, stand out firmly for justice. Okay? It says, stand out firmly for justice before God, even if it be against yourselves or your next of kin, your family, okay? or anyone else, or your people. If my people, whoever it happened to be, Palestinians, Americans, whatever it happened to be, committed atrocities, did things that were occupying people, I have an obligation to speak out against it, even if it was my own father. When we're saying, when Palestinians say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, yeah, you could take it because that's what the Israeli propaganda line is, because they want to try to censor people from expressing their aspirations of freedom, okay? When the South Africans, and I actually, when we were at the university, went and we were marching against the Afrikaners for Nelson Mandela, who was considered a terrorist, and the ANC was considered terrorist. And we said we wanted to bring down the system of apartheid. The whites said, oh, you want to wipe out the white people from South Africa. You guys are doing basically the same thing. We want to get rid of an oppressive, apartheid, subjugating, occupying system. I'm going to talk to you again, a couple of things. When Muslims they established the Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, it was over 600 years after the Jews believed that their temple built by Herod was destroyed by the Romans. Over 600 years had elapsed. When the Caliph Omar got the key for Jerusalem, and the Patriarch did not want Jews to be allowed into Jerusalem, Muslims let them into Jerusalem. That's where you have the Palestinian Jews that lived among their brothers and sisters in Palestine. When the Crusaders came in and wiped out the Muslims and the Jews and other Christians that didn't agree with them, and Salah ad-Din liberated it with the blood of the Muslims, again, the Muslims allowed the Jews to come back because we do believe in the righteousness of Jews. They are the people of the scripture, and we respect the Jews who follow Judaism. Some of the strongest, most effective Jews are people who are supporting our cause. Whether you like them or not, and I know because they're not Zionists, they're being ostracized. Not in our name. Jewish Voice for Peace. Some of the religious Jews, they say that we will not accept what Israel is doing because it goes against the principles of Judaism. And now let me just make the final comment. Hey, I'll tell you what I'm a hater of. Yes, I'll tell you what I'm a hater of. When we talk about anti-Semitism on campus, I will tell you, if you want to eat kosher, enjoy the Sabbath, go to the synagogue, do whatever you want to do, practice your faith, wear the talent, do whatever it is, or the kippah, whatever you happen to be, and someone is against you, I swear to God, I will be the first to stand against someone. We don't want anyone who is anti-Jew to be part of our very righteous movement, okay? That's not what we're looking for. However, and this is the problem that we have, you are not, when you're feeling uncertain or you're feeling, not feeling good or under threat, if it was because you were trying to practice your faith, I will support you. I will 100% back you up. But you're supporting a foreign government that's subjugating another people. If you're carrying an Israeli flag, I don't see you as a Jew. I see you as a Zionist supporter of occupation. The ones that are promoting anti-Semitism is Israel. And they will be silent when you have people, they will be silent when you have people like MAGA supporters and white supremacists and the Jews are trying to replace us. That's okay because they're supporting Israel. They will move your embassy, okay? It's okay. Or the Christian fundamentalists that want you to come to Israel so that you die in the rapture if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. You take them as allies. They're not anti-Semitic. But someone who speaks out for the right of Palestinians is anti-Semitic?
I guess this is the only microphone that works. Listen, I think that it would be, if we think about ways to move forward that are productive and rational and reasonable, I think there are a number of things that it would be good to try to agree on. One would be that both Jews and Palestinians have deep historical, religious connections to the land we know as Palestine and Israel. We need to recognize that when people critique the state of Israel, they're not necessarily being anti-Semitic, they're critiquing the actions of a state. Likewise, when people critique the actions of Hamas, PLO, Fatah, whatever, it is about critiquing a particular political body, not being Islamophobic or anti-Palestinian. Another really important point, I think, is to think about what would it really mean to have an equal division of land in Palestine and Israel. What would it take? What would it mean? What kind of sacrifices would that entail? I think what we need, I'm asking a really serious question here. I think it's a really important and serious question. What would that mean? Right now, there's nothing close to that. And I think we have to really think about, where the sacrifices will come from, who will moderate, and how we're going to get past this terrible, terrible impasse before more people are killed on both sides.
Well, Shale, very briefly, we've got to wrap it up.
Okay, I guess we have to go back to fundamentals again here. The idea that Jews do not have a right to a state, which is what Othman is arguing. Okay, so I mentioned
Never said that.
that Jews preceded Muslims in the land for 2,000 years. Another thing to mention is that if we're talking about colonialism, there is no more successful example of colonialism in world history than the Muslim conquests. They conquered the entire region. And now one people has managed to preserve its identity and return to its land where it was before, and it is denied a right to do that. Let me ask you leftists in the audience, if somewhere in Spanish Latin America, in the former Spaniard Empire, a Native American people had preserved its identity and managed to return to its land and create a state in some small corner of Latin America, would you say that they were colonial occupiers, that they had no right to be in the land? Of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't, and you know that. And also, all the accusations that Othman made about how Israel is fighting, my question to you is, you tell me a country that under similar circumstances would make greater efforts than Israel has to spare civilians. There are none. Others.
So, if you would please, we are fast running out of time. We've kind of reached the lightning round, and as you heard, we have in our audience the chancellor of this institution, Dr. Mark Money, and so as part of our lightning round, which implies very brief responses, I wonder if each of you could offer some suggestions to Chancellor Money about what the university could do going forward.
Change the name of the library.
I believe that what we need, and again, I really feel, despite the fact that people are, again, I think it's normal to be emotional. This has happened before. I remember when I had spoken to even when I was in college before, and they used to talk to us about how things were during the Vietnam War and things that were going on. There was people are protesting in again, very emotional way. I believe, I'm glad that people are able to hear and listen. They want to close their ears or not close their ears, it's up to them. But I think, in my view, as an educational institution, I will say number one, we need to always have classes and a forum where people can learn about complex subjects from individuals of different backgrounds, okay? And this is something that I find to be very, very important. So if people want to talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, having educated people who will read the narratives of different sides and they can debate it in their classes. And we actually have that. I mean, this is something that when I was at the university, we actually were able to do so, and I hope that that's something that will continue here. Number two, I think that there has to be, again, continuous programs, educational programs. It's a university. This is where you debate ideas. This is where you go back and forth and try to expand your views and so forth. Maybe at some point there can be a trip that can be taken where you can actually go and visit this West Bank. I think Gaza is being wiped off the map, but maybe you go. That's short for me, okay? So I think that maybe having that where, again, there can be different perspectives. So for me, it's mainly educational outlet for people, and I think that if that takes place, that's what universities are about. It's about education. Thank you.
Dale, review from the inside?
Yeah, so my suggestion would be mutual respect, consistency, and compromise. We should respect the legitimate aspirations of all people. We should apply our principles in a consistent manner to all peoples. And we should seek compromise where it is reasonable, and we should expect that of others.
I'm going to say three things, and I'm going to say them despite the fact that I want to say that I think the first two are being done beautifully. And so I want to commend you, Chancellor Maloney, on that. The first is to ensure the physical safety of all of the students. And I want to thank Chief Salazar and the UWM Police Department, I think has done a really, really superb job in doing that, including keeping us all safe here tonight, so thank you. I think the second is to ensure the emotional and intellectual well-being of all our students, and Dean of Students Adam Jussel's here today and has been a partner to many of us in the room in doing just that, so I want to thank him and his team too, and also Dr. Vang, I don't know where she went, for doing that too and providing opportunities to, to discuss. The third one, which is maybe the more controversial one, and where I'm glad I'm not in your shoes, Dr. Moni, is to work with other university leaders around the country and really around the world to address the systemic biases that exist in the world of higher education. The fact of the matter is, it is not new that academic and intellectual veneers have been put over old systems of hate, and we think we see that in the academy today, both in the United States as well as in Europe, and to work more and more with others that are in similar positions to do a more holistic systemic change to make sure that there is no continued intellectualized and academic anti-Semitism.
In terms of, I think, what this campus can do to further educate students, faculty, staff, and community, I think would be a series of lectures and discussions that further address the history of this conflict in some detail. I think that really is helpful for many Americans, especially young Americans who really may have very little knowledge of the conflict. I think also really important is presentations of individual accounts, either historic accounts or contemporary accounts of both Jews and Palestinians, what they have experienced living in Israel-Palestine, the ways in which they have suffered, the ways in which they have in some ways been able to thrive and live, raise children, and so on. I think that these kinds of accounts, when shared appropriately, can be very humanizing, something that I think is very important for us to try to get past the division, to try to help all of us understand the suffering on both sides. So I think lectures and presentations, experiential presentations might be one way to go.
Well, Chancellor Maloney, you just got some free consulting advice. Didn't cost the state a dime, so I hope you appreciate that. Thank you to our audience, and obviously there's a lot more to be said and a lot more to be felt, and we'll navigate that as best we can in the days going forward. And now to wrap us up, I would return the mic to Dr. Vang.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Shell. And thank you, Othman, for your willingness to be in the same space together. Thank you,